Buffalo Plus cow, the rare crossbreed that almost no one has ever seen. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and comment telling us where you're listening from. Dr. Patricia Wheeler had spent 30 years working in agricultural genetics at the University of Queensland. But nothing in her extensive career had prepared her for the phone call she received on a humid January morning. On the other end of the line was Ben Marsden, a cattle breeder from the Northern Territory, and his voice carried a mixture of excitement and confusion that immediately piqued her interest. "Dr. Wheeler, I've got something on my property that shouldn't exist." Ben's words tumbled out rapidly. "I need you to come see it. I need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind." "Slow down, Ben. What exactly are we talking about here?" Patricia set down her coffee and pulled out a notepad. "A beefalo. At least, that's what I think it is. But not like the commercial crossbreeds you see in the States. This is different. This is a water buffalo and a Brahman cow cross. And Pat, the calf, is thriving. It's 3 months old, healthy as anything I've ever seen, and it shouldn't be possible." Patricia felt her pulse quicken. Beefalo, the cross between American bison and domestic cattle, were well documented. But Asian water buffalo and cattle, despite being related species, had significant genetic barriers that made successful crossbreeding extremely rare. Most attempts resulted in stillbirths or non-viable offspring. A healthy, thriving 3-month-old hybrid. That was extraordinary. "I'm catching the next flight to Darwin," Patricia said, already mentally rearranging her schedule. "Don't let that animal out of your sight. And for God's sake, don't mention this to anyone else until I've examined it." 24 hours later, Patricia stood in a dusty paddock outside Catherine, staring at what might be the most genetically significant bovine she'd ever encountered. The calf was unmistakable in its hybrid nature. It had the compact, muscular build of a water buffalo combined with the longer legs and body structure of a Brahman cow. Its hide was a unique grey-brown color, neither the deep black of a water buffalo nor the pale cream of the Brahman. Most striking were its horns, already beginning to emerge at 3 months old, curved slightly backward like a buffalo's, but positioned more like a cow's. "This is Titan," Ben said, his voice filled with unmistakable pride. "Born on the 16th of October. Mother's name is Rosie, my best Brahman breeding cow. Father is Big Jack, a water buffalo I bought 3 years ago from a buffalo farm up near Darwin. How did this even happen?" Patricia circled Titan slowly, taking photographs from every angle. "You didn't deliberately breed them, surely?" "Hell no. I'm not that stupid." Ben shook his head. "Jack was supposed to be in the North Paddock with my small buffalo herd. I've been trying to get into buffalo farming, see if it's viable alongside the cattle operation. But the wet season floods damaged some fencing, and Jack got in with the cattle. By the time I realized what had happened, Rosie was already pregnant." Patricia knelt beside Titan, who watched her with intelligent, calm eyes. The calf allowed her to examine him, showing no fear or aggression. She checked his body condition, his muscle development, the structure of his developing horn buds. Everything suggested a healthy, viable animal. "Have you had him vet-checked? Blood work, genetic testing?" "Local vet came out 6 weeks ago, said he was healthy, but recommended I contact someone at the university. That's when I found your name." Ben pulled out his phone and showed Patricia the basic blood work results. Everything came back normal, or as normal as you can get for something that's not supposed to exist. Patricia spent the next 2 hours conducting a thorough examination, taking blood samples, hair samples, and extensive measurements. Titan tolerated it all with remarkable patience. When she finally stood up, her knees creaking in protest, she was smiling. "Ben, do you understand what you've got here? This isn't just a rare crossbreed. This is potentially a whole new avenue for tropical cattle development." Water buffalo are incredibly well adapted to heat and humidity, resistant to diseases that plague cattle in the tropics. If Titan proves fertile, if he can reproduce, you could be looking at the foundation of an entirely new livestock breed. You reckon he'll be able to breed? Ben's eyes widened. That's the million-dollar question. Most hybrid animals are sterile. Mules, ligers, most beefalo. But some aren't. We won't know until he's sexually mature, probably another year. Patricia looked at Rosie, who was grazing nearby, keeping a watchful eye on her unusual offspring. What's her temperament been like since giving birth? Any different from her other calves? She's more protective, actually, won't let the other cows near him. And Big Jack, the father, he's taken an interest too. Keeps breaking through to check on the calf. I've had to reinforce the fencing 3 times. Ben gestured toward the far paddock where a massive water buffalo stood at the fence line, watching them. It's like they both know this one's special. Patricia stayed on Ben's property for 3 days, observing Titan's behavior, documenting his interactions with both the cattle herd and his buffalo father. Collecting data that would form the basis of what she already knew would be a groundbreaking paper. On the 3rd evening, sitting on Ben's veranda as the sun set over the northern landscape, she outlined what needed to happen next. We need to keep this quiet until we've got solid data. The last thing we need is media attention before we understand what we're dealing with. I'll need regular updates, photos, videos, measurements. When Titan's 6 months old, I want to bring up a team to do comprehensive genetic sequencing. And if the media finds out, Ben asked, nursing a cold beer, then we control the narrative. We present it as a scientific curiosity, not a commercial opportunity, at least not yet. Patricia leaned back in her chair. The moment people think there's money in this, you'll have every opportunist in the country trying to replicate what happened here. Most of them will fail, and a lot of animals will suffer in the process. Ben nodded slowly. I get it. But Pat, keeping secrets in the territory isn't easy. People talk. My station hands have already seen Titan. My neighbors know I've got something unusual. Then we need to move fast, get the data, publish the findings, establish the scientific record before it becomes a circus. Patricia pulled out her laptop. I'm going to draft a preliminary report tonight. By the time anyone else starts asking questions, we'll be the established authority on this phenomenon. Over the following months, Patricia made regular trips to Catherine, watching Titan grow and develop. The hybrid calf thrived in the harsh tropical environment, showing remarkable heat tolerance and a resistance to parasites that plagued both cattle and buffalo in the region. His growth rate was impressive, faster than typical cattle, but more controlled than buffalo calves, who often grew too rapidly for their skeletal development. By his 6th-month mark, Titan had become something of a local legend, despite Ben's attempts at discretion. Word had spread through the tight-knit farming community, and visitors began showing up unannounced, wanting to see the impossible calf. Ben, protective of his unusual animal, started turning people away, which only increased speculation about what he was hiding. The genetic sequencing results arrived in March, and they were extraordinary. Titan had a stable genome, 54 chromosomes compared to cattle's 60 and buffalo's 48. The chromosomal arrangement was unique but appeared viable. More importantly, preliminary tests suggested that Titan's reproductive system was developing normally. He might not be sterile after all. Patricia presented her preliminary findings at a closed session of the Australian Agricultural Genetics Conference. The response was immediate and divided. Some colleagues were excited about the potential applications for tropical livestock development. Others were concerned about the ethical implications of what they saw as genetic manipulation. Even though Titan's conception had been entirely accidental, Dr. Robert Chen, a colleague from the University of Sydney, pulled Patricia aside after her presentation. You realize what you're sitting on here. If that animal proves fertile, if he can breed true, you could revolutionize cattle farming in tropical regions worldwide. But Pet, you need to think about the commercial pressures that's going to bring. Buffalo farmers will see it as a threat. Cattle breeders will want in on it. The politics alone could kill your research. I'm aware, Patricia replied. That's why we're proceeding carefully. Right now, Titan is a scientific curiosity. We study him, we learn from him, and we publish our findings. What happens after that? She shrugged. That's beyond my control. But control was slipping away faster than Patricia realized. A journalist from a Darwin newspaper had heard rumors about the hybrid calf and showed up at Ben's property unannounced. Ben refused to comment, but the damage was done. Within a week, the story had hit the national news. Miracle calf, the impossible cross between buffalo and cow, screamed the headlines. Patricia's phone rang constantly, media outlets wanting interviews, commercial breeders wanting information, animal rights activists concerned about welfare. The university's PR department went into overdrive, trying to manage the narrative while protecting Patricia's research. Through it all, Titan remained oblivious to the chaos he'd created. Now 9 months old and growing larger by the day, he grazed peacefully in Ben's paddock, his unique appearance becoming more pronounced with maturity. His horns had developed into impressive curved structures, his body had filled out with dense muscle, and his temperament remained remarkably calm for such a large, powerful animal. It was during this period of media frenzy that Patricia received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Amelia Zhang, a geneticist from the International Livestock Research Institute in Kenya, had flown halfway around the world specifically to examine Titan. Dr. Wheeler, what you have here could be transformative for food security in developing tropical nations, Amelia said after spending a full day examining Titan. In East Africa, we're dealing with devastating cattle diseases, drought, extreme heat. Water buffalo genetics could provide solutions, but pure buffalo don't adapt well to our African cattle management systems. A stable hybrid, that could bridge the gap. Patricia and Amelia spent 2 weeks collaborating on comprehensive studies of Titan's physiology, genetics, and behavior. They discovered that Titan's heat tolerance was exceptional, even better than his buffalo father's. His metabolism was more efficient than typical cattle, requiring less feed for the same weight gain, and his immune system appeared robust, showing resistance to several common cattle diseases. We need to see if he can reproduce, Amelia said during one of their evening discussions. That's the critical question. If Titan's sterile, he's a fascinating genetic accident, but nothing more. If he's fertile, if his offspring are viable, then we're looking at potential foundation genetics for an entirely new direction in livestock development. Ben had been remarkably patient with the constant stream of researchers, journalists, and curious onlookers, but Patricia could see the strain was wearing on him. His normal station operations were disrupted, his staff were distracted, and the attention was making it difficult to maintain the controlled environment Titan needed for proper study. I'm thinking of moving him, Ben confided to Patricia one evening. Got a mate with a property near Alice Springs, more remote, easier to control access. Titan's getting too valuable to risk having something happen to him here. That might not be a bad idea, Patricia agreed. But we'd need to ensure proper facilities, continued access for research. And Ben, we need to start thinking about breeding trials. Titan's nearly a year old. In another 6 months, he'll be sexually mature. Breed him to what? A cow or a buffalo? Both, ideally. We need to understand his fertility from every angle. Patricia pulled out her tablet, showing Ben a proposed breeding program. If he can sire calves with regular cattle, that's one thing. If he can breed with buffalo, that's another. And if his offspring are fertile, that's when things get really interesting. The move to Alice Springs happened in May, coordinated like a military operation. Ben had upgraded his friend's property with specialized facilities, funded partially by a grant Patricia had secured from the Australian Research Council. The new location provided security, proper research infrastructure, and most importantly, privacy. Titan made the journey well, transported in a custom trailer designed to accommodate his unique size and temperament. By his 15th month, Titan had reached an impressive size, larger than most bulls his age, but not quite as massive as a mature water buffalo. Patricia and her expanded research team, which now included veterinary specialists and reproductive physiologists, began the carefully planned breeding trials. The first attempt was with a young Brahman heifer named Pearl, selected for her calm temperament and excellent health. The introduction was done gradually, allowing the animals to become familiar with each other over several weeks. When the time came, Titan showed appropriate interest, and the breeding was successful from a behavioral standpoint. Now came the waiting game to see if conception had occurred. 90 days until we can confirm pregnancy, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the team's reproductive specialist, told Patricia. But I have to say, Titan's behavior was completely natural. If I hadn't known what he was, I'd have thought he was just another bull. While they waited for results from Pearl, the team conducted extensive studies on Titan's semen quality, hormone levels, and overall reproductive health. Everything pointed to a fully functional reproductive system, which was remarkable given his hybrid status. It was during this period that an unexpected complication arose. Big Jack, Titan's buffalo father, had become increasingly agitated at Ben's original property. According to Ben's staff, the massive buffalo had been trying to break through fencing, bellowing constantly and refusing to eat properly. He was looking for Titan. "I think we need to bring Jack here," Ben told Patricia during one of their weekly video calls. "I know it complicates things, but that buffalo's going to kill himself trying to get to his son. I've never seen anything like it." Patricia consulted with animal behaviorists and ultimately agreed. Big Jack was transported to Alice Springs, and the reunion between father and offspring was remarkable. Titan, who'd been calm but slightly restless since the move, immediately settled when Jack arrived. The two animals, so different in appearance yet clearly bonded, spent hours standing together, the massive buffalo occasionally grooming his hybrid son with gentle affection. "It's extraordinary," Patricia recorded in her research notes. "The paternal bond has persisted despite extended separation. This suggests a level of emotional intelligence and memory in water buffalo that hasn't been adequately documented." Big Jack recognizes Titan as his offspring and demonstrates protective behavior typically associated more with maternal than paternal care. 3 months after the breeding, ultrasound confirmed what the team had hoped for. Pearl was pregnant. The news sent ripples through the agricultural genetics community. If the pregnancy carried to term, if the calf was healthy, it would confirm that Titan was indeed fertile and capable of producing viable offspring. But the celebration was tempered by concern. What would Titan's offspring look like? Would they be healthy? Would they inherit the best traits of both species or suffer from genetic complications? The questions kept Patricia awake at night. As Pearl's pregnancy progressed normally, the team prepared for every possible outcome. A veterinary surgical suite was established on site in case of complications. Multiple specialists were on call, and Patricia found herself spending more and more time at the Alice Springs facility, unwilling to miss any development in what had become the most important research project of her career. Titan, seemingly unaware of the scientific significance of his existence, had settled into a comfortable routine. He grazed alongside Big Jack, interacted calmly with the research team, and showed particular interest whenever Pearl was nearby. His size had continued to increase, and at 18 months he weighed in at an impressive 700 kilograms. with the muscular build and sturdy frame that suggested he'd grow larger still. Media interest, which had died down somewhat after the move, reignited when news of Pearl's pregnancy leaked. Patricia found herself giving carefully worded interviews, trying to balance public interest with scientific integrity. She emphasized the research aspects while downplaying the commercial implications, though she knew that conversation was inevitable. Commercial cattle breeders had begun reaching out, wanting to know if Titan's genetics would be available for their herds. Some offered substantial sums for breeding rights. Patricia and Ben had multiple discussions about the ethical and practical implications of commercializing what had begun as an accidental breeding. "Part of me thinks we should keep this purely scientific," Patricia admitted during one such conversation. "But Ben, I also recognize that you've invested time, money, and resources into this. You deserve some return on that investment." "It's not about the money, not really," Ben replied, "though I won't lie and say it wouldn't help. It's about doing right by Titan. He's not just a research subject to me, Pat. Ben struggled for words. "He's special, and whatever decisions we make about his future, about his genetics, I want them to be ones we can be proud of." They agreed to wait until Pearl's calf was born and assessed before making any decisions about commercial breeding. In the meantime, Patricia published a comprehensive paper on Titan's genetics, physiology, and behavior in the Journal of Animal Science. The paper was met with both acclaim and criticism, sparking debates about the ethics of hybrid breeding, the potential risks of introducing new genetics into established livestock populations, and the implications for biodiversity. Through it all, Titan remained the calm center of the storm. He grazed, he rested, he interacted with Big Jack and the research team with the same steady temperament that had characterized him from birth. Patricia often found herself standing at the fence, watching him, marveling at how one accidental breeding had opened up so many questions about genetics, animal behavior, and the future of livestock development. "What are you thinking?" Amelia asked one evening, joining Patricia at the fence. She'd returned for Pearl's impending delivery. "I'm thinking that 30 years of research, hundreds of published papers, and nothing I've ever done will be as significant as this one accidental calf." Patricia smiled ruefully. "It's humbling, really. All our careful planning and controlled experiments, and the most important discovery comes from a damaged fence and a bull who wandered into the wrong paddock." Pearl's labor began on a clear August morning, 9 months and 2 weeks after breeding. The entire research team assembled, along with 3 veterinary specialists and enough monitoring equipment to stock a small hospital. Patricia hadn't slept properly in days, running through worst-case scenarios, preparing for every possible complication. But Pearl, with the calm efficiency of her Brahmin heritage, delivered a healthy calf after just 4 hours of labor. The moment the calf hit the ground, taking its first breath and shaking its head, Patricia felt tears streaming down her face. After 18 months of research, speculation, and sleepless nights, here was the answer to their most important question. Titan could reproduce. His offspring was alive, vigorous, and apparently healthy. The calf was a female, which they named Aurora. She had her mother's coloring, mostly cream with darker points, but her build was distinctly different from a pure Brahman calf. She was sturdier, more compact, with a slightly broader head and the beginnings of what would likely be more substantial horns. At birth, she weighed 42 kilograms, heavier than typical Brahman calves, but not as heavy as pure buffalo calves. "She's a quarter buffalo, 3/4 cow," Sarah said, examining the newborn. "If she proves fertile, and if we breed her back to cattle, we'd get animals that are 1/8 buffalo. That might be the sweet spot for tropical cattle development. Enough buffalo genetics for heat tolerance and disease resistance, but predominantly cattle for temperament and management. Titan, kept in an adjacent pen during the delivery, had been pacing and bellowing throughout Pearl's labor. When Aurora was finally on her feet and nursing, Ben made the decision to let Titan see his offspring. The introduction was done carefully, with the team ready to intervene if Titan showed any aggression. But the big hybrid bull simply approached the fence, extended his neck to sniff the calf, and released a soft, rumbling sound that was almost a purr. Aurora, bold despite being just hours old, wobbled over to investigate her father. The image of the massive hybrid bull gently touching noses with his tiny calf through the fence made it onto the front page of every major Australian newspaper the next day. Big Jack, never one to be left out, was allowed to meet Aurora the following day. The ancient bond between the water buffalo and the new generation was unmistakable. Jack was even gentler with Aurora than Titan had been, and Patricia found herself wondering how many generations of this remarkable lineage she might be privileged to witness. Aurora's early development was monitored obsessively. Blood work, growth measurements, behavioral observations, everything was documented and analyzed. By her 3rd month, it was clear she'd inherited the best of both her parents' genetics. She grew faster than pure Brahman calves, but with excellent structural soundness. Her heat tolerance was exceptional, and she showed no signs of the genetic abnormalities that plagued many hybrid animals. The success of Aurora's birth changed everything. The conversations about commercial breeding could no longer be postponed. Patricia and Ben, with input from the university and various agricultural organizations, developed a careful breeding program that would make Titan's genetics available to select breeders while maintaining strict oversight and research protocols. "We're not selling semen straws to just anyone," Patricia insisted during negotiations with the Australian Cattle Association. "Every breeding needs to be documented, every offspring tracked. This isn't about making a quick profit. This is about potentially developing a new direction for tropical livestock that could benefit farmers across northern Australia and beyond." The program that emerged was rigorous. Breeders had to meet specific criteria regarding facilities, management practices, and record keeping. They had to agree to participate in ongoing research and to share data about any offspring produced. And they had to understand that they were part of a long-term genetic experiment, not a guaranteed commercial venture. Within a year, Titan had sired calves, with 12 carefully selected Brahman cows. The offspring, Aurora's half-siblings, were remarkably consistent in their traits. They all showed superior heat tolerance, excellent growth rates, and calm temperaments. Early disease resistance trials suggested they inherited Titan's robust immune system. The agricultural genetics community began to take serious notice. But for Patricia, the most significant moment came when Aurora reached 18 months old and showed her first heat cycle. The calf, that shouldn't have existed, had grown into a healthy young heifer who appeared to be fertile. When Aurora was eventually bred to a pure Brahman bull and successfully conceived, Patricia knew they'd achieved something truly remarkable. 3 generations, from accidental hybrid to established breeding line, in just 5 years. International interest exploded. Delegations from tropical cattle-raising nations visited Alice Springs to see Titan and his growing family. Research partnerships were established with institutions in Africa, Asia, and South America. What had begun as one Australian farmer's genetic accident was evolving into a potential solution for food security in some of the world's most challenging climates. Ben, who'd never sought attention or acclaim, found himself an unlikely celebrity in agricultural circles. He handled it with the same pragmatic approach he brought to everything, remaining focused on the welfare of his animals and the integrity of the research program. On a warm evening, 3 years after Titan's discovery, Patricia stood in the paddock watching 4 generations grazing together. Big Jack, now elderly but still imposing, stood like a patriarch over his unusual family. Titan, in his prime at 4 years old, had proven himself not just as a genetic curiosity, but as a foundation sire for what might become an entirely new direction in livestock development. Aurora grazed alongside her own first calf, a healthy female who showed even more refined traits than her mother. And Pearl, the Brahman heifer, who'd taken a chance on an unusual mate, watched over them all with the serene confidence of a matriarch who'd birthed something extraordinary. "Still hard to believe sometimes," Ben said, joining Patricia at the fence, "that this all started because I didn't fix a fence quickly enough." "The best discoveries often start with accidents," Patricia replied, "but turning an accident into something meaningful that takes wisdom, patience, and care. You provided that, Ben. Titan might be genetically remarkable, but you're the reason his story became something that could help people." As the sun set over the red earth of Central Australia, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Patricia thought about the unpredictable nature of scientific discovery. 30 years of controlled experiments, and her most significant contribution to her field had walked into existence through a damaged fence. But perhaps that was the lesson Titan had been meant to teach her all along. That sometimes the most important answers don't come from the questions we carefully plan to ask, but from the unexpected possibilities we're wise enough to recognize and brave enough to pursue.